A man in white robes rode across the desert, and the world turned him into a legend. But legends are dangerous things. They simplify the truth. They turn chaos into a story, politics into destiny, and a wounded man into a hero carved from sunlight and sand. For many people, that man was Lawrence of Arabia, a British officer on a camel, a scholar who became a warrior, a lonely figure crossing the burning emptiness of Arabia, helping Arab fighters rise against the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. It is a powerful image, but the deeper story is not as clean as the image. T.E. Lawrence did not simply ride into the desert and free a people. He did not create the Arab Revolt alone. He did not control the promises made by empires. And when the war ended, the dream he believed in did not become the future he imagined. That is where the story becomes painful. Lawrence was divided inside himself, between Britain and Arabia, between duty and belief, between empire's work and the hope of Arab independence, between the legend the world wanted and the human being who could not survive inside it. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to English Mindwave. To understand Lawrence, the curious learner cannot begin with the camel, the robes, or the famous film. The story must begin much earlier, in silence, shame, and a family secret that followed him long before the desert ever did. Thomas Edward Lawrence was born in Wales in 1888. His family name looks simple, but it was already a mask. His father was Sir Thomas Chapman, a married Irish nobleman who had left his wife and children to live with Sarah Junner, the governess of his household. Because divorce was refused, Chapman and Sarah took the surname Lawrence and moved often, trying to hide from scandal. So before the world gave Lawrence a myth, life had already given him a wound. He grew up knowing that identity could be fragile. A name could protect a person, but it could also hide a truth. A family could look respectable from the outside while carrying something painful underneath. Perhaps that is why he became so fascinated by the past. As a teenager, Lawrence cycled through the English countryside, studying old churches and medieval buildings. Later, he rode through France, visiting castles. He was drawn to ruins, stone walls, and the remains of old wars. At Oxford, he studied history, but books were not enough. For his research on Crusader military architecture, he walked across Syria for 3 months, traveling nearly 1,000 miles, visiting castles, villages, roads, and ruins under the hard sun. He traveled alone. He listened to local people. He learned Arabic. He was beaten and robbed by brigands. For many young scholars, that might have ended the romance of the Middle East forever. For Lawrence, it deepened the connection. After graduating, he joined an archaeological excavation in Syria under Leonard Woolley. For several years, he lived close to Arab culture, became fluent in Arabic, and developed an admiration many British officers would never understand. Before he became a soldier, he was a listener. Before the desert became a battlefield, it was a place of language, memory, and human contact. But history has a way of changing the meaning of knowledge. In 1914, Lawrence joined Woolley and Captain Stuart Newcomb on a survey of the Sinai Peninsula. Officially, it was research connected to ancient routes. In reality, it also served British military interests. They studied water sources, terrain, and possible routes an Ottoman force might use if it moved toward the Suez Canal. The scholar who loved ruins and languages was now helping an empire prepare for war. When the First World War began, that contradiction became his life. In December 1914, Lawrence arrived in Egypt as a temporary second lieutenant. There was no dramatic entrance, no white robes, no camel against the horizon. He was placed at a desk in Cairo, working for the Arab Bureau, producing maps and intelligence reports about Ottoman forces. Hardly the romantic figure of legend, but the war in the Middle East was becoming dangerous for Britain. Gallipoli had failed. British forces had surrendered at Kut al-Amara. Ottoman forces threatened the Sinai, and beyond it, the Suez Canal, one of the most important routes of the British imperial world. Then came the possibility of revolt. Sheriff Hussein bin Ali, Emir of Mecca, had been communicating with the British. He wanted support for a large independent Arab kingdom after the war. Britain wanted to weaken the Ottoman Empire from within. One side heard the language of national hope. The other heard the language of military advantage. That difference would haunt everything that followed. In June 1916, Hussein proclaimed the Arab Revolt. Mecca and Jeddah were taken, but Medina remained strongly defended by Ottoman forces. The revolt needed direction, unity, and support. Lawrence was sent to assess the situation. He met Hussein's sons and became especially drawn to Faisal. Faisal was not a loud, theatrical commander. His strength was quieter. He had patience, political instinct, and the ability to hold men together. Lawrence saw in him the possible future of the Arab cause. Together, they supported a strategy that avoided direct battle with stronger Ottoman forces. Instead of trying to capture Medina immediately, Arab fighters would attack the Hejaz Railway, the supply line running from Damascus to Medina. This was not a war of grand armies facing each other across open fields. It was a war of movement, sabotage, patience, and pressure. Tracks could be blown up, trains could be attacked, Ottoman troops could be forced to guard miles of vulnerable line. It suited the Bedouin fighters. It also suited Lawrence. He disliked rigid chains of command, understood mobility, and seemed most alive near danger. And so the legend began to form. But here, the learner must pause. The most famous version of Lawrence's story is also the most misleading. The Arab Revolt was not a one-man adventure led by a British officer in beautiful robes. Faisal commanded the Arab Northern Army. Tribal leaders led their own men. Auda Abu Tayi and his Hawaitat warriors were essential in battle. Other British officers, including Cyril Wilson, Stuart Newcomb, and Pierce Joyce, also played important roles. Behind the romantic desert image stood rifles, ammunition, gold, aircraft, ships, armored cars, and the machinery of imperial war. Lawrence mattered, but not because he did everything. He mattered because he became a bridge. He could move between British command and Faisal's camp, between maps and tribal politics, between strategy and emotion, between a war office that wanted results and Arab leaders who wanted a future. His greatest military moment came at Aqaba in July 1917. Aqaba's Ottoman defenses faced the sea because that was where an attack was expected. Lawrence supported a far bolder idea: cross the harsh desert and attack from inland, from the direction the Ottomans believed impossible. It was audacious, risky, almost reckless. And it worked. Aqaba fell with minimal Arab losses. The victory opened a supply port for Faisal's forces and gave the revolt new strength. But even here, the truth is richer than the myth. Lawrence helped imagine and encourage the plan, yet Auda Abu Tayi and his men delivered the attack. The victory belonged not to one man, but to many. After Aqaba, the road led north toward Damascus. For Faisal and Lawrence, Damascus was not just another city, it was a symbol. If the Arab forces could enter Damascus as liberators, perhaps the world would have to recognize the political future they had fought for. But history rarely gives its cruelest lessons loudly. Sometimes it gives them quietly, in the gap between victory and meaning. When Lawrence reached Damascus in October 1918, the city had already surrendered to an Australian officer. The clean, triumphant scene later imagined by legend was not what he found. There was confusion. Prisons had been opened. Armed groups moved through the streets. Some people looted. Others searched for revenge. Civilians tried to protect their homes and families. The dream of a dignified liberation began under the shadow of disorder. For the learner, this is the emotional turning point. The military campaign had reached Damascus, but the political dream was already slipping away. Because the real decisions were not being made in the desert. They were being shaped in government rooms, in secret agreements, in diplomatic language written far away from the people who had fought. During the war, Hussein had believed British encouragement meant support for Arab independence. Lawrence believed in that cause with unusual sincerity for a British officer. But in 1916, Britain and France had signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement, dividing much of the Ottoman Middle East into spheres of influence. Then, in 1917, the Balfour Declaration added another British commitment in Palestine. Different promises had been made to different people. And after the war, not all promises could survive. At the Paris Peace Conference, Faisal and Lawrence tried to defend the Arab dream. But the settlement that followed was not the kingdom they had imagined. In 1920, French forces defeated Faisal's army and took Damascus. Faisal was forced into exile. The dream was reduced, negotiated, and broken piece by piece. And just as Lawrence watched it collapse, the world began turning him into a hero. In 1919, American filmmaker Lowell Thomas presented Lawrence to audiences as a romantic desert warrior. The image was irresistible. A short, blue-eyed British officer in flowing robes, riding through Arabia, uniting tribes, fighting empire, liberating cities. The public loved it because it was simple. But Lawrence knew the truth was not simple. His own memoir, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, made the legend even stronger. It was vivid, haunting, and beautifully written, but it was also part memory, part confession, part literature, part myth. Lawrence did not only become a legend because others invented him, he also helped write the version of himself that the world would remember. That may be the loneliest part of the story. To become famous for a self that no longer feels bearable. After the war, Lawrence could not live comfortably inside the name Lawrence of Arabia. At the Cairo Conference in 1921, he helped advise Winston Churchill as Britain tried to manage the new political order in the region. Faisal was placed on the throne of Iraq. Abdullah became ruler in Jordan. Perhaps Lawrence needed to believe that something had been saved, But it was not the vast Arab kingdom once imagined. It was a compromise shaped by empire, diplomacy, and limited power. So, Lawrence began to disappear. He joined the Royal Air Force under the name John Ross. When the press exposed him, he later used another name, T.E. Shaw. The man the world wanted to celebrate chose false names, low rank, and quiet technical work. He wanted to become ordinary, but fame followed him like a shadow. Then came the motorcycles. Speed became his private language. Movement without speeches. Danger without politics. Silence with an engine inside it. In May 1935, near his cottage at Clouds Hill in Dorset, Lawrence swerved to avoid two boys on bicycles. He crashed, fell into a coma, and died 6 days later. He was 46 years old. One doctor who treated him, Hugh Cairns, later studied motorcycle head injuries. His research helped contribute to helmet laws in Britain decades later. So the final legacy of Lawrence was not only desert war, diplomacy, or legend. It was also a warning. Public images can become prisons. History can turn real people into symbols. Victory can hide disappointment. A beautiful story may leave out the wounds that made it possible. T.E. Lawrence remains unforgettable, not because he was simple, but because he was divided between Britain and Arabia, between duty and belief, between the promise he wanted to honor and the politics he could not control. The world remembered the man in white robes. But behind that image was someone far more human, a wounded scholar, a wartime bridge between cultures, a believer in a dream that slipped away, and a man who spent his final years trying to escape the legend that carried his name. Maybe that is why his story still matters. Because history is not only made by heroes. Sometimes it is made by people standing between promises and power, realizing too late that the future has already been drawn on a map they were never allowed to hold. Was Lawrence a hero, a tragic figure, or both? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story gave you something to think about, subscribe to English Mindwave to support the channel and help create more meaningful stories next time.